You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew Ledrew. Thank you all for joining me for the Write Project podcast. Valentine's Day was last week, and as such, we have an odd question for our panel of authors to answer today. We're going to be asking them, can someone be an author if they don't feel emotion strongly or don't have high emotional intelligence? This is a weird question, but it is one that we have asked many of the authors that we've had on our show. With us today to discuss this, we have a panel of 9 amazing authors to try and source out the root of this problem. We have Brad Dunn, the author of After Dark Vapors, a werewolf story set in Labrador. We have Bridget Canning, whose book The Greatest Hits of Wanda James was shortlisted for an NLBA award last year. We have Ellen Curtis, currently the secretary of the Writers Alliance of Newfoundland and Labrador and author of the Infinity series. We have Paul Carberry, best-selling author of the Zombies on the Rock series. We have Aaron Vance, editor-in-chief at Engine Books. We have Tanith Frost, author of the Immortal Soulless series. We have Ali House, author of the Segment Delta Archives science fiction series. We have Peter Foote, a frequent contributor to the From the Rock series of anthology short fiction. And we have Gareth Mitten, whose work has appeared in About Face from Breakwater Books, and soon will appear in Dystopia from the Rock from Engine Books. First on the line, we have Brad Dunn, as I said, the author of After Dark Vapors, a dark werewolf story set in northern Labrador. Brad, do you think someone can be a writer if they don't, feel emotions strongly? Do you think sociopaths can be writers? No, joke.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's so many books, I think, that, you read it and it's great, but there's not really that human element in it. It's very, technical.
Yeah.
I almost feel like that can be a criticism of Tolkien.
Yes.
Maybe Martin Amis, I feel like, is another one.
William Gibson, I found him really dry.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that's a criticism that people have of genre fiction, is that it's too idea-driven.
Yeah.
Too concept-heavy. And loses track of
the fact that this is supposed to be an emotional journey about character.
Yeah, and the characters just feel very cookie cutter, very uninspired. They're almost just there because it's they have to be there, right?
Yeah.
So can you write a great novel unless you're an emotional person? I don't really know.
That's interesting. Actually, one of my favorite genre books is very unemotional. It's Rendezvous with Rama.
Right, yeah.
And it's a famous hard science fiction by Arthur C. Clarke, same guy who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's a planet named Rama that's coming into, a rogue planet that's coming into our system, and it's only going to be there for 12 days, and then it's going to leave.
Yeah.
And a team of scientists goes and examines the planet, and examines the flora and the fauna and the geology and all that stuff, and then they leave. They never encounter an alien. They never encounter... There's no conflict. There's no drama. It's just 300 pages of describing what an alien world might look like.
Yeah, it's... Because I know that Rendezvous with Rama is one of those books that has been tried to have been adapted into film so many times. But
Morgan Freeman's been attached for 20 years because basically what would have to be is amazingly cool visuals of scientists looking at stuff with some really good narration. So he's been saying for years that he just wants to be the person to narrate it.
Right. Yeah. It's and I know that novel, and there isn't much character drama, if any, in it.
I think at one point they mentioned that 2 of the scientists are exes, but nothing comes of it.
Yeah, that's something Clarke definitely struggled with. I remember I really like Childhood's End.
Yeah.
And that's got this really cool concept. I feel like he almost challenged himself to do it with that. There's a part in the book where he really tries to explore what people would be like in this sort of post-human world where all our problems are solved, and it's a very interesting philosophical question. How would we live our lives if we had aliens just taking care of everything?
Yeah.
and I feel like it doesn't work. It's like really boring, and he that's not his strength. He's a concept guy. I would argue Dune has the same problem. Dune is a very concept driven novel that
spice.
Yeah, the spice trade and all the stuff with the Bene Gesserit and
I really wish that George Lucas had looked at like the whole like how people responded to pages upon pages dealing with trade negotiations over spice and thought long and hard about that.
I'm interested to see how Villeneuve will adapt it, because Dune is a very strange novel that's super popular, but it's weird. I think people don't realize how weird of a book it is, you know?
Yeah.
It works on the page, but I don't know. We'll see.
I think the only way to do it, because I mean, like,
it's gonna
like
take
an
a lot of work.
establishing shot, like if you're going to describe a creepy castle, like in a horror book, you might take 2 or 3 pages to intimately describe this unbelievably creepy castle.
Yeah.
And in a movie, you can do that with a 10-second establishing shot.
Exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, I think whenever they're describing something that takes pages and pages to describe, like, how the economy of spice trade in a world works.
Right.
Like, filmmakers always, there's always the fans who want everything in them. Like, no, that can't go in.
Yeah.
That's like, that doesn't go in. Like, it just doesn't.
Yeah, you can't just have an economist from this world come in and do a lecture on the spice
that would
trade.
be funny, though. Like a DVD extra where it's just like a professor from that world. Like, let me explain.
Yeah.
Spice trade started in 2163.
Apparently, one of the things they experimented with Lynch's adaptation was that they handed out these like little leaflets to theater goers.
Yep.
To be like, here's your little primer. You know, it's like the spice trade. And
you have to do some advanced reading before you're allowed to watch this movie.
And I think like Lynch just like hated it. Was like, I'm not giving my viewers homework. Like, you know what I mean?
That sounds awesome, though. If only you could do that. Yeah. To be fair, that's almost what some movie-going culture has been like. Like, I love comic books and I love comic book movies.
Yeah.
But, like, some of the bad ones are the ones where things don't make... There's no internal logic to the movie.
Yeah.
Like Man of Steel.
Right.
It doesn't make sense unless you've read the Superman comics.
Man of Steel doesn't make sense unless you took speed before going to see this movie.
That as well. That as well. But at the end, when he kills someone and is upset about that, like, we as comic book fans know that Superman has a code against killing, and that upsets him whenever he has to.
Yeah.
He at no point does that ever come up.
He never articulates that, you know? Like,
his father never articulates it, he never articulates it, it's never an issue, so it comes just out of left field.
Yeah.
And to an extent, what people who defend it in that way, like, oh, Superman has a code against killing or something like that, when they're not basing it on the internal logic of the story, what they're saying is you should have done your homework before you went to the movie.
Definitely. Like, I remember watching that movie, and that scene has so much gravitas, unearned gravitas to it.
Yeah.
That I remember thinking, like, so what? And then, like, I read, like, I think that I'm probably the ideal viewer that they want to see this movie. Like, I'm not like a super comic book nerd, but I know like comic books.
I'm well read and I love comic books.
Yeah.
So
and then I was like, oh yeah, like he's got this thing with not killing people. But I mean, Batman had that too, and he's mowing people down.
Oh my god,
with his machine gun in Batman versus Superman.
It's bad.
But yeah, it's like you said, like
I checked out that movie, and that most of that franchise, the second Man of Steel had like a 30-minute opening on Krypton where we're following around his dad and riding dragons, and I'm like, none of this is gonna pay off.
Russell Crowe just flying these giant
None
dragons.
of this is gonna pay off. Like, I know how this story ends. Planet Boom.
Although I will pay the ticket price just to see Michael Shannon as Zod. Just Michael Shannon chewing up the scenery is always worth the ticket price for me.
That's fair.
But I think another big failure with like those comic book movies was like the Amazing Spider-Man movies.
I like the first one, but the second one, I feel kind of dumb for liking the first one, because honestly, like, I loved it and most people hated it, and I defended it. I saw literary significance in it. I saw all these themes and stuff like that at play. And then the second one came out, and all the same people were like, "This is horrible." And I saw it, and I was like, "Yeah, that is horrible." And I kind of was like, did something go over my head? Like, was
Right.
there badness in the first one that I missed?
Yeah. I wouldn't say I hated the movies in and of themselves. Like, they're fine, harmless popcorn movies. But, like, they fell into the trap that a lot of people criticize comic book movies for, which is exactly that. Like, if you don't know the Marvel universe, then you can't appreciate these movies.
Yeah.
And I feel like in those Spider-Man movies, they were always trying to, like, tantalize you with these little, like...
Oh, you'd see, like, the Dr. Octopus arms in the background.
And it's like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, then do it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, stop teasing people with this movie and actually do it.
Yeah, like,
Number
they
one.
didn't tease Dr. Octopus in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
We just had it in number 2, and it was a complete story, and people liked it.
There's no, like, oh, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We're good. This is cool. Like, just do it. Like, you know, and that's definitely one of the traps that they fell into. And I think, like, the MCU movies are getting better with that. Like, it's not so, like, fixated on interconnecting everything.
No,
like,
that's why Edgar Wright left Ant-Man, and that kind
Yeah.
of made me angry.
But I think like something like Black Panther, I think did a really great job.
It did.
At just standing on its own. Like, it's its own movie. The villain lives and dies in the movie. There's no, like, we're going to kick the can down the road, and just always this, like,
I think the
obsession with
first
franchising.
movie in each of the franchises does a good job of that. Like,
Yeah.
Iron Man did a good job of
Yeah.
that. Didn't think Captain America did, actually, but Thor did a good job of it. Black Panther, we just said. Ant-Man, the first one, did a good job of that. It's when the individual movies get their sequels that it's like, ooh, like, by the time Captain America 3 rolled around, it was just an Avengers movie that also had Captain America in it.
Yeah, Civil War, yeah, that got a little too out of hand.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I liked it, but they should just called it Avengers. Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, at that point, it's like the Wu-Tang. It's like
Yeah.
every like solo Wu-Tang album is actually just another Wu-Tang album because
Yes.
they're all on each other's albums.
yes.
But I mean, I think that's part of the fun. But
That's
you know.
fair. Oh, it is. It's
Yeah.
absolutely part of the fun. Don't get me wrong. I love some Marvel. I think the first one I disliked was Ant-Man and Wasp this
Right.
year. Like, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always defend those movies because they're better than they have to be.
Yeah.
Like I think, like, as much as you want to criticize them, just look at what Zack Snyder did.
Yeah.
And that's how bad it can be.
Well, at this point, the fact that they still try...
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. Like, it's one thing. You can't name another franchise that's produced 20 movies.
No.
And they still have middling quality, because that's never happened before.
No. Like, there's always an attempt to tell a good story.
Yeah.
I feel like they're always trying to address, like, criticisms. Like, I think, like, Black Panther, like, addressed, like, every criticism that people had about Marvel movies. And and I mean, like, you look at, like, what's happened with Star Wars, like Solo.
Yeah.
Didn't happen, like, didn't work.
I was not a fan of that. Yeah.
No, and the DCEU is not.
But just think of the because with Star Wars, it's a weird thing where they've got the main franchise and the side franchise.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to see either one of the side franchise ones in theaters because,
Right.
by definition, if it's not important enough to put in the main story,
Yeah.
it's just not important.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll go see a movie if they make an origin movie about Bib Fortuna. I'll go see it.
That's
like,
fair.
I love Star Wars.
Gotcha.
And, like, I enjoyed Solo. It was okay, but at this point, like, I'm also not, like, a big prequel hater. Like,
Yeah.
I don't take Star Wars that seriously.
Yeah.
Like, man, like, the people who got really upset about, like, The Last Jedi.
I love The Last Jedi.
I mean, the movie has its issues, but, like, it's like, come on, people, this isn't Citizen Kane. Like,
I actually thought it was. I was like, this is great. Like,
well, I mean, that's great. Like, I think, like,
Yeah.
Empire is one of the great movies. Like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like, it is a kids movie. It's not like Luke Skywalker is not going to go murder people. Like, you know, I don't want to, like, put low standards on it just because it's a kids movie, but at the same time, like, they're very much made to be these great spectacle blockbuster movies. They're not meant to serve these small niches. And
I didn't.
if I go to a Star Wars movie and I feel like, oh, that was entertaining, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah, and with the ones I've seen since Disney got it, I've never once looked at my watch.
No.
Like when I watched Man of Steel, I must have looked at my watch 20 times.
Solo, I felt the length of it, and I think the issue with Solo the whole time. I was like, man, I wish they had just let the Lego guys make this movie.
Yeah,
because I can see the parts of it that I could see their fingerprint.
Yeah,
and it's like, you just let them make the funny movie,
Yeah,
but unfortunately, that's kind of like the Disney aspect of it,
Yeah, it's problematic on a lot of different ways.
I don't even know how we got to there.
I think we're talking about feeling emotions.
Yeah, he was just feeling and emotions. We started talking about Dune, and then one thing led to another.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Brad. Next up, we have Bridget Canning, whose book "The Greatest Hits of Wanda James" was shortlisted for an NLBA award just last year. Bridget, do you think that people can write novels if they don't feel emotion strongly?
Might make for a very interesting book. It'd be kind of an interesting voice. I mean, don't feel emotion strongly. I think a lot of writing is, kind of observing and imagining maybe what people can feel. I mean, there's a lot of things that, especially if you haven't experienced it, so you're imagining. You do have to kind of tap into some empathy. So I imagine it would be you could be, an author and a writer, but I think you would end up becoming limited in some way if you weren't able to tap into, human empathy that well to put yourself in another person's shoes. I think you would have a pretty limited range.
Oh, thanks again, Bridget. Next up on the line, we have Ellen Curtis, author of the Infinity series, and currently serving as secretary on the Writers Alliance of Newfoundland and Labrador board. Ellen, do you think that people can write stories if they don't feel emotion strongly? Or do you think that writers need to, be the type of person that wears their heart on their sleeve kind of thing?
I think that they can be a good writer for a different type of writing than an emotional writer is a good type of writer for.
Yeah.
I think...
hard science fiction.
Hard science fiction, yeah, is what immediately comes to mind there. Is good when you're not adding a whole bunch of emotion in. Whereas, say, writing a romance probably wouldn't go over well if you were not putting in emotion.
If you don't have, say... It might be a better way to ask would be if you have emotional intelligence or not.
Yeah, I think an author needs to probably be emotionally intelligent to hit the mark with a lot of readers.
Yeah.
But, that said, there are readers who aren't necessarily going to be emotionally intelligent as well. And there are, for them, authors that aren't very emotional probably wouldn't miss the mark.
That's true, and it's hard to fit. That's almost a marketing trick in and of itself, because I've read books where, say, hard science fiction, to go back to it, where if you gave that to a reader that likes emotional-driven things, they just can't get into it.
Exactly.
It's like reading a repair manual.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I've given stuff that has strong emotional beats to it, and you give it to people who more are factual-based, and all they're doing is picking out the plot holes or the logic holes or stuff like this.
Yeah.
When a lot of writers who write more emotional-driven stuff, will say that it doesn't matter if everything makes perfect sense. It matters if it makes emotional sense.
Yeah. Thinking about that too, a lot of more heavy, action-driven things coming out. You see a lot of the times in movies where the script may not make much sense from a character arc perspective, but it's got all the flash and bang that draws in moviegoers.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing translates to books as well sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Comic books and superhero movies and stuff are a lot like that too.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, there's a lot of time, and you could be critical of this too, but a lot of times there's violence. Usually it'll be end with a fight scene or something like that, and it's this moment where logically that doesn't make sense sometimes, but it's gotten to the point where there needs to be a fight because that's what emotionally makes sense.
Yeah.
I was watching someone the other day, and they compared the modern blockbuster superhero movie to musicals, and they were saying that in a musical, when the emotions get to a point that they're at a breaking point, you have a song, and in a superhero movie, when the emotions get to the point where you're having a breaking point, you have a fight. It's the same thing. It's formulaically, it's the same. You just replace musicals with fight scenes.
I mean, I'd like to see someone's thesis argument for that. Sure.
For sure. I would also now want to see, I want to see Avengers 5, the musical. Because Disney has the property, they could do that. And just every fight scene was also a musical.
I'm gonna veto that one.
If I had a hammer, I'd hammer night and day.
I mean, I'm thinking back to Once More with Feeling,
Yeah.
and
Spider-Man Stomp Out the Night was a big thing.
I'm not familiar with that. But
That was a Broadway musical starring Spider-Man. It was bad.
Again, I'll pass, although I did just see an Ariel Silks artist perform to Spider-Man, and it was so on point.
Yes, you were down at an event down St. John's doing book selling.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Ellen. Next up, we have Paul Carberry, author of the Zombies on the Rock series. Paul, what do you think? Can people write if they don't feel emotion strongly or have high emotional intelligence?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to write. If you're trying to write a true life event, it's probably best that you're not emotional and that you can keep your head on your shoulders and write the facts and not have an opinion.
Yep.
But to write a fiction story, a genre story, yeah, you got to be involved in it personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Paul. Next up, we have Erin Vance, editor-in-chief at Engine Books. I'm interested to see what she thinks. Do you think that people can write if they don't feel emotion strongly? Or do you think that that's necessary to be a writer?
Everyone feels emotions, though. I think that's part of being a human. I've never met anyone who doesn't. The high emotional IQ part, I don't always comprehend the emotions that I'm feeling. And I often use writing as a way to figure it out. So I don't think it's a detriment so much. If people are having trouble figuring out their emotions and then they put a character in that position, they're stepping out of themselves enough to figure it out. So I think writing actually could be very beneficial.
That's brilliant. That's good. That's a great answer. Next up, we have Tanith Frost, the very talented author of the Immortal Soulless series. Tanith, do you think that people can write novels if they aren't in touch with their emotions?
Wow. These are good questions. I think, okay. As far as feeling emotions strongly, I don't think that's strictly necessary. I have depression, and that means that I often don't feel very much. I don't feel joy. I don't necessarily feel a lot of sadness. I don't feel a lot of anything. I think the important thing for authors is to have an understanding of the emotions. Even having past experience with the emotions, having empathy, understanding what their characters are going through, and being able to use that not only to show what's happening inside of the characters, but also to be able to evoke those emotions in the readers. So a certain level of emotional intelligence is important, but I wouldn't say you necessarily have to be an overly emotional person.
Okay, that's actually a really good answer. That's great. Thank you, Tanith. Next up, we have Ali House, whose second novel, The Fifth Queen, debuts in late March. Ali, do you think that people can write novels if they don't feel emotion strongly?
It's kind of hard for me to imagine that because I am very emotional in my own writing. I'm very much feelings based. But I would say that there are different kinds of ways to tell a story. So if they're not that good at emotions, but they're really good at descriptions and action, then they might be able to get away with it. They might be able to tell the story in a good enough way without necessarily the heightened emotions, or they might be able to, bring in enough emotions to make it good. I'm terrible at descriptions, but I still write.
Yeah. That's fair. Well, you're not terrible at descriptions. You're wonderful at descriptions, but I hear you.
Okay, I work real hard at descriptions,
That's
but
fair.
Emotions are just easy.
I mean, there are a lot of examples of very good authors who they themselves think that they're not good at emotions or that they're purposely leave them out. So, Arthur C. Clarke, he writes hard science fiction. He wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, the novel version, and all that kind of stuff. And that or Rendezvous with Rama, and that purposely leaves out any emotion. It's just professionals doing their job, looking at a planet kind of thing. Just science. It's weird and interesting and somehow still compelling. And I've read it 3 times, Rama that is, and I still can't put my finger on why it's compelling, but it is. And then there's Stephen King, who seems to think he's no good at romance, even though I like it when he puts the effort in and tries.
I guess there's not really one right way to tell a story. So if you're able to tell a story through different means and it suits the story well, then it doesn't matter if you're not as good in one area.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you, Allie, for that insight. Next up, we have Peter Foote, who is a frequent contributor to the From the Rock series of anthology short fiction. Peter, do you think that people can write novels if they don't feel emotions terribly strongly?
I'm sure they could, but I don't know if it'd be somebody I'd really want to read. I like to say that every story has an audience. That may be the exception to the rule. I can't imagine enjoying something if the writer didn't have an emotional investment in it, and that didn't come through with their writing.
That's fair. That's a fair answer. Thank you, Peter. Last but not least on the line, we have Gareth Mitten, who is a contributor to About Face from Breakwater Books, as well as Dystopia from the Rock from Engine Books, which debuts later in March. Gareth, do you think that someone can be a writer if they don't feel emotion strongly or have high emotional intelligence?
That's really interesting, and I'm not really sure I'm equipped to answer the question. I personally am an incredibly emotional person.
Yep.
I think a lot of people who are compelled to write probably are of that ilk. I doubt very much that somebody who's a little harder would be incapable of writing, but we all feel. We all
Yeah.
feel. We all emote in different ways. For the most part, we all feel. There might be some among us who have some issues and don't. But I think ultimately, everybody deep down feels on a great deal, and I imagine there's something worth reading in everyone.
But my go-to example of a book that doesn't deal with that stuff, or an author that doesn't, is Arthur C. Clarke, because they're not for everyone, but you know.
I never thought about it that way, really. Like, there's a lot of it might not be emotion, but there's a lot of depth, I think, in Arthur C. Clarke's.
Oh yes.
And I think Philip K. Dick, who I read more of, is kind of the same. They're more men of science, I guess, first and foremost, and interested in philosophical questions, you know, that lie within scientific advancement. So that's not really necessarily human focused, but you can't pull the human element out of that, because it's always about people at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Have you ever read Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama?
I have not.
Give it a try. It's got no emotion, there's no character development. It is literally a 400-page fake scientific journal.
That sounds boring.
Oh yes, it's unbelievably dry, but what I can't get over is how engrossed I got in it. Like, it's the description. Like, it's basically this... It's the book I recommend when people are like, can you just tell a story with description? And I'm like, yes, here's Rendezvous with Rama, because it paints its picture through, like, narrative and through tone and through all this other stuff. And I'm like, that's interesting.
That is really interesting. I'll definitely check that out. I will check it out.
I mean, it's not one of my top 10 favorite novels of all time. I'm not trying to give it a ringing endorsement, but when it comes to that sort of, how would you write something without human emotion in it? It's like, here you go. Surprisingly good.
I definitely will check that out. I do feel that, you know, I feel like some of my stuff the concept is more important to me, maybe, than the people.
Yeah.
And the people become just a means of, you know, sort of telling the story of where the technology has gone. And sometimes I'm kind of like, oh, these characters all seem a bit samey. Maybe I need to, like, you know, think a bit more about their backgrounds and what they're feeling. So I think as a science fiction writer, you can easily fall into that trap if you're not careful.
Yeah. I think you're right. I try and strike a balance between the two. I try to, but I do think that that's something that can happen, absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.